Good evening. Ooh, we have sound.
Not a lot of people. But yeah. No, yeah, I'll remember that.
All right, we all ready to hear some wonderful poetry this evening? Hope you all got plenty to eat, plenty to drink, and are ready to hear some good poems. Welcome. My name is Jen Lynn. I'm the program director of LiTFUSE, a program of Tieton Arts and Humanities. LiTFUSE began 17 years ago as a weekend workshop as a way to unite poets, and has become a mighty force in the poetry world, connecting, encouraging, and inspiring poets and poetry throughout the Northwest and now beyond. Welcome all to Fuel, our monthly reading series program, an extension of that LiTFUSE workshop that began so many years ago. Now establishing a monthly presence and infusing more poetry into the air of Tieton. I'm surrounded by others here who support the endeavors of Tieton Arts and Humanities, helping make this happen. Amber Knox, our executive director, you probably met out at the table. Kate Hotler, our Crearte program director, whose amazing students are filling this space, and there she is. Kate. Amber's there in the back. She changed positions on you. And we also have Lauren Imbrock, who is new to our team. Sorry to put you on the spot, Lauren, but thank you so much. She's been a help to both Crearte and LiTFUSE. And then we've got Keith Aholm in the back, manning our video, audio, streaming movies.
Servant leader on our board.
He is. He's a board member. He does a lot of other behind-the-scenes stuff as well. He's helping me to get more organized. And then there's other people behind the scenes, and many board members, many who support the endeavors of Tieton Arts and Humanities, bringing arts into the community of Tieton. I'd like to begin our evening with a land acknowledgement. Tieton Arts and Humanities resides on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakima Nation. Tieton Arts and Humanities values all relationships that reinforce our commitment to art as a powerful tool for equity and diversity. In recognizing the history and respecting the sovereignty of Washington's Indian nations, Tieton Arts and Humanities recognizes and honors these first people and their significant role today in stewarding these lands as they continue to honor and uphold their ancient heritage. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and for your support of poetry and the arts. Besides all of you here in this room, and those on the Tieton Arts and Humanities team, we have many sponsors I would like to thank, some of who have made a significant impact and provided a way for free programming. We have Poetry Foundation, Humanities Washington, National Endowment for the Humanities, Washington State Arts Commission, National Endowment for the Arts, Fresh Hop Ale Festival, Yakima Chief Hops, the Skurin Foundation, Yakima Valley Community Foundation, Inklings Bookstore, Fiesta Foods, Yakima Coffee House Poets, which we have a couple of representatives here tonight. Ed and Linda, thank you for being here. And many other private donors like yourselves. Thank you very much for giving us space and support to be able to make things like LiTFUSE Fuel happen. Like I said, LiTFUSE Fuel is a free event, which is of high importance to us. Pablo Neruda once said, this is one of my favorite poetry quotes, "Poetry is like bread, it should be shared by peasants and scholars alike. But please, if you have means, consider donating or even sponsoring a specific aspect of LiTFUSE Fuel or the larger LiTFUSE program so that we can continue to meet the needs of our community, poetry and the arts in our community." And then another thing before we begin, I know some of you have already needed this, but the bathroom is located on the outside of the building. Just head out to the left, or head out the main door left, and then left again on the side of the building. It is an old gas station. But if you use the bathroom, make sure doors on both sides are locked. Shouldn't be anybody going in that way, but just in case, make sure cover all your bases. So just a little bit of a workdown of what's going to be tonight. The last couple of months we've had our featured reader and then gone right into the open mic. But tonight Derek's gonna share some work with you all, and then he's just gonna stay up here and open up the floor for a time of question and answers. And so feel free to pelt him with all of your poetry questions, make him as uncomfortable as possible. And no, he's excited to be here and do that. And then after that, we'll take a small break so people can refresh, use the bathrooms, get more drinks if they'd like, eat lots of pizza, please. There's so much. And then we'll move on into our open mic night. I do apologize for the doors being closed. I would much rather have that bay door open, but it is just way too warm outside, and we're gonna let the air conditioner keep it a little bit tolerable. I also want to remind you that we are streaming this on Facebook Live. So if that makes you uncomfortable with asking questions, I just want you to be aware of that. We will have it off for the open mic portion of our evening. And now, why we're here is for Derek Sheffield. Let me introduce him. Derek Sheffield's collection, Not for Luck, was selected by Mark Doty for the Wheelbarrow Books Poetry Prize. His other books include Through the Second Skin, finalist for the Washington State Book Award, Dear America, Letters of Hope, Habitat, Art, Ecology, and Poetry. Whoops, I skipped a line. I was like, that doesn't sound right. I know that's not right.
Hey, that sounds like a great idea for a book.
You know, things happen for a reason.
I like it.
Letters of Hope, Habitat, Defiance, and Democracy. That sounds better. And forthcoming in March 2023, Cascadia Field Guide, Art, Ecology, and Poetry. He's also the editor of terrain.org. Hope you guys picked up a card out there. You need to check that out. And can often be found in the forests and rivers near Leavenworth, Washington. Please welcome Derek Sheffield.
Oh, thank you, Jen. I have to say that I recognize some of you because I watched this event when Kristen Berger, who is a terrain.org poet, when she read here. And so some of you, like you, I know, yes, you, I remember from that event. So it's fun to be with you here in person without the help of a screen. Jen, thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you for reaching out, and thanks to the Tieton Arts and Humanities for many years as a National Public Radio listener. I was hearing a lot about this mighty Tieton, mighty Tieton, what the heck's going on down there? And then pretty soon came down to take part in some of the LiTFUSE Festival, and saw indeed the might in the mighty Tieton. So I love that not only that is as robust as ever, looking at this year's lineup, it's just incredible, but also that you have expanded your reach and repurposed this fueling station and redefined fuel for us. I'd like to draw your attention to one of my favorite pieces here up in the corner. I like create too. There's something, that's like a little poem. I like create. So thank you very much. And I have to say, Jen, that you did not intend this, but when I was talking to you, I talked to you right before I figured out which poems I wanted to read tonight. And so you told me that you have 5 children, and I heard some of them in the background when we were on the phone. And so I thought that I would bookend this reading. I started with family, with children. That's how I want to begin, and then end with family and related things. So, and speaking of family, none of mine are here tonight because, well, you know, I love what Scott Russell Sanders, I don't know if you know Scott Russell Sanders' work. He's this terrific essayist and fiction writer. And he says that his children are about as interested in his books as a farmer's children are as interested in the potatoes he grows. So anyway, family, here's a potato for you. This is called obad. Does anybody know what an obad is? What is it?
It's an homage home to the morning, right?
Yeah, when I learned about it from my teacher at University of Washington, Nelson Bentley, he told us it was a love poem that was set or thought of. I like that too, that was set or thought of at dawn or dusk. Obad. He woke and slipped into sleeves in the dark. A few steps creaked, clink of spoon as he stirred cream, made sure not to trip. The toy prince sprawled by the door, left that sleeping house like a thief. Still, our girl woke, she says, hours later, while they talk over the phone. The sun outside beating its gong. He can hear how it must have gone, that little voice rising through the dark room. Is it morning time? As the window held the lights of his car, sweeping away under star scatter. I should thank you guys too for coming out because it's like, what, 108 degrees outside? Yeah, okay. Let's cool it down a little bit. Daughter and father in winter. Clap like this, she says, and we clap, the stuttering snaps of the kindling coming to life in the stove we have scooted close to play the game she makes as the fire goes. Raise your arms, and we move like flames, waving hello and goodbye to the snow outside our windows. Now close your eyes, and she gets us to bunch ourselves into balls and hold tight inside the heat's growing belly. Don't peek, and I don't stop peering into the dark. Silence, ash. Look, it's snowing in my eyes. Yes, I say, opening mine, and I'm starting to freeze. She opens her eyes and sees the frost in my beard. Her laughter ignites another fire. Exactly what needs saying. There's Father at the kitchen counter, and there he is at the stovetop, where a steel pot's beginning to bubble. Now he's picking up and putting away, rinsing plates, for tomorrow it begins again. It never stops, your whole life with him. And now, when you visit, his standing at the sink, face clouded in steam, hands carefully drying each glass as you sit in the family room sharing your life with your sisters. It keeps going, this hiding behind the sweeping and wiping, this acting as if the crumbs you might scatter or the dirt on your shoes is what matters. This pretending not to see you, rolling around on the floor with your toddler daughters, one after the other over the years, plopped on that same red rug, shaking her hands and crying as you crooned, "Use your words." It never stops, this reserve of doing what needs doing, and his father before, always gone or going to harrow or hammer. And what about you, alone in the dark of mourning as you like, here in your house on a side street while your family sleeps on? How much longer will it be before you stop doing and start saying exactly what needs saying? So this poem is a few years old, and I didn't write it as for any kind of political act. It was just a poem that arose out of my life and a time when I was thinking about my mother. And as it happens to be timely now. And I want to thank my mother who gave this poem her blessing. Abortion Wish. Wherever you are, whomever, I would you were never begun, half-brother. Not for anything you did, but for how she was done when you began. Autumn's leaves clawing the gravel drive he walked out on. That boy, father, after she told him about it, about you. Nothing for her to do but let her father pay the fare to a charity in Portland, where she lived with other fucked girls from other single school towns. There they studied for the life a GED would bring, learning to lower their eyes as the lives inside them grew. The night you were triggered I would void, so she never had to be that alone. Legs pressed wide in a room full of gloves and masks as she heaved you out in sheet-twisting pain. With you undone, no baby to not be touched when a nurse held you to the glass. She thought it a kindness. While our mother, still in bed, still bleeding at the rip, dried fig of a smile on her beautiful girl face, took in your ruddy cheeks, dark hair, your shut eyes, the little features she would come back to all her life, what she went looking for when nothing seemed to be looking for her. Maybe a doctor or actor. How rich or handsome by now. She never knew. For you, like all the faces when she went home, turned away. Didn't you know, brother? You were the one who carried her happiness. I've been doing a lot of forgetful things these days. One of the forgetful things was, as I was considering which poems to read tonight, there were some new ones that I wanted to share with you. And I printed them, and that's where they still are on the printer. But the daughters came through, And so I have it, the daughters and the phone. If there's anything that you don't like about this poem, I want you to talk to Joe or Zach, because they helped me with it. So if any of the bad parts, surely these two right here, they helped me make this poem gooder. The issues of the day. If he would let me speak to him, I wouldn't say a thing about the issues of the day. His son or Jesus, my sin or his. I would only say that galaxy of guppies we found was the day we bent a hanger into a frame to slip his mother's pantyhose around. No minutes or hours, only us on our knees beside a roadside ditch, and flecks of lightning we scooped and shouted for. 100 sermons or more, I would say, we ducked between the pews to doodle and point and smile and poke and feel tears squeeze from our eyes and our bodies shake to contain fits of wild laughter. At the organ's first moans, we scrambled out the side door and stopped to blink in the sudden bright before walking slowly across gravel to where weeds began. Without a word, we dropped to one knee to gather the rocks that felt right in our hands. We were ideologues of moments and the breath in our bodies when we were lucky enough to be together and feel what it was to have a brother, to stand beside and throw rocks into a field as hard and far-arcing as we could. It never occurred to us, watching each one go, that we could possibly land in a time when we would be each other's silence. Did they do okay? Let the record show. So Jen mentioned this book, Dear America, that was where terrain.org, which is the oldest online journal in the world dedicated to the writing of place-based writing. Still celebrating 25th anniversary next year. And up until 2016, November of 2016, that's what we had been. And then what happened then made us realize, well, we responded to our contributors who were sending us work about issues that were bubbling up in our country. And so over 4 years, we curated the Letter to America series, which was then compiled into this book. About 30% of this book is new work. Shortly after, Jericho Brown wrote a poem for it. He won the Pulitzer Prize. We call it the terrain.org bump. Okay. They saw that he was in here, so Pulitzer. And Arthur Z. and some other fantastic folks gave us some new work that the press needed, because the rest of the content is available on terrain.org. And as it happens, I'm a little out front of this. I don't know if I'm supposed to even be telling you this, but that Letter to America series is going to evolve into something else very soon. And you'll see that in the digital pages of terrain.org. But one of the great joys of making this book for me was coming across this beautiful little poem by a poet I'd never heard of, and it's just one of my favorite things in the book. It's called What You'd Want to Remember, and it's by Miriam Marty Clark. And it's a poem that has helped me in the last few years, the last couple of years since this book came out. Now, daylight spent, darkness falls before supper, votives flickering down the long table, and voices. Someone leaning in to hear, or back, to laugh or consider. Someone reaching over to touch, tentative, kind, not out, but over, across the dark. It wasn't any one thing you'd want to remember later. A story, a gesture, a beautiful face, animated in the candlelight. The glasses refilled again and again, and how late you stayed talking into that autumn night. You'd need an old word for what it was. Our commonweal. You'd need that when you thought back. Okay, so just I think a couple more, 2 or 3 more maybe. I don't know about you, but I've been eating a lot of sweet corn lately, and boy is it good. Golden Jubilee. A life of bending low to drop a seed and pat it home, of striding back and forth to hoe and water and wait. The rows run straight as ever as Uncle's prized corn grows in the same squared ground since before I was born. What do they mean? Those sun-struck afternoons after church we gathered in the grass beside his rows to talk and sing and scoop buttery kernels steaming onto plates. This year and last, Uncle's corn grows with help. Left to himself, he might wonder why nothing came up where no seed went. When he can speak it, my name these days is the deepening hole where he will soon go. A life of growing under the sun. Those first green stalks, those shining silks. Straight as ever, the rows run. And let's finish off with 2 more, getting back to that family and related things theme. This has got one of those titles that spills right into the text. She gathers rocks wherever she goes. Make that sticks, no, leaves, which is to say heads of flowers and hips. More river than daughter, her arms fill with treasures of every trail. Hold this, she says, to make us her buckets, her pockets already clack and bristle full. It goes fast, they say, and it was going as they said it, or it's gone into us, counting to 5 times a day, saying, time for bed, time to wake, time to leave. And it's gone into her quickening eyes and stride that have left us among all the things she once believed she couldn't leave behind. And here's the final poem on family and related things. Several years ago, my friend came up to me, and he and his wife had just had the surprise of a third child. His wife was pregnant. They thought they were done, right? Had their two, done. Not so. And as a matter of fact, to this day, that kid's grown up a bit, and his nickname is Bonus. Everybody on the street knows him as Bonus. He's a real character. But my friend Chris came up to me one day and he said, well, you know, so this happened, and he said, so I've been thinking about, he said, so have you gotten that done yet? And I said, no, I haven't gotten that done. And he said, well, have you thought about getting it done? Not really. I haven't thought about getting it done. He said, well, I've been thinking about getting it done. And I found this doctor in Seattle, and that's all he does. All day. Boom, 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 boom. So, one day, Chris and I took a road trip to Seattle. And later, this poem. As you might imagine, it's called Getting It Done, and it is for Charles Wilson, Dr. Charles Wilson. Naked below your waist and on your back, you shake your doctor's hand. Call me Chick, he says, snapping on a pair of gloves. You've never heard that one, but you'd rather a chick did what this man is about to do than your logger neighbor, Doug. You've driven 2 mountain passes to get to Seattle, and this specialist's reputed pianist's touch. And you can't see him knobbing a skidder through the stumps of a clear cut. Get Her Done is not bumper stuck to the rear of his Prius. No, you're certain as you lie with your legs open, you found a woodsman of another kind, whose fingertips have butterfly kissed the keys of countless men and counting. Little Amadeuses that just now adjust a gooseneck lamp, deftly tape your shaft to your belly and begin to swab your scrotum. Your eyes fix upon the photo deliberately hung for all the men who have lain here and all the Richards to come. It's a family in what looks to be a park. And then, oh, escapes your mouth as if you're about to sing, say, can you, as Chick digs for a vase like a granny after a weed. One hand pinches a clamp on every furtive strip of your hog soul, while the other pelts your left testicle with lidocaine. The mother and daughter watch as the father tosses the son into the air, arms upraised in a skewed U, their smiles framed in bright swarms of autumn leaves. Chick, too, is smiling as he hands you a pocket knife that bears his clinic's name. And you're up and walking like a man with an egg on a spoon, mincing past the receptionist who nods as if "come again" is about to slip from her lips. A pale man in the waiting room watches your every step to the glass door and out into the rinsed air of April. A breath of fluttery forms and teetering songs and stems everywhere about to bloom. Thank you.
I have the first question.
Yeah.
So, the kids screaming in the background, is that what inspired you to read that poem tonight?
The last poem, yes. Yes, indeed. That, yes.
All right, now you.
Yeah.
So I've heard it said that, well, one of the questions we ask ourselves in poetry are we truth tellers or are we liars? And I've heard it said that poetry is the supreme fiction. I'm just wondering, there are a lot of things that seem true from your poetry. I don't want to speak for you, but I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit how you balance what we might call capital T truth or emotional truth or something like that versus the literal truth in poetry. Because often the literal truth can kind of ground a poem too much, potentially. But yeah, I'm curious how you navigate that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question that I struggled with for many years in my writing, because you're right, these poems do come out of my life, and that's really the kind of poetry I'm interested in, that moves me when I read others. You might think of it as referential poetry. And I think that when you're writing that kind of poetry, that verisimilitude, that kind of sincerity, it's like, the way I look at it anyway, I think other people have different responses to this, but the way I look at it is that there's kind of it's like creative nonfiction. There's kind of a pact, that, you may make some tweaks here or there, but there's a seed of the experience that's really, that really happened, and I think you can generally feel that in the poem. But you're absolutely right. That source of strength in terms of what sends you to the page can turn into shackles, and you can't be shackled exactly to the actual events. And so for an example, in that last poem I read, if say it actually happened in January, but it worked better in the poem to set it in April for that image of all the stems blooming at the end. Those are the kinds of discoveries and generated surprises that come about through the process. And well, the other thing I would say is too, I just when I hit the page and I'm writing from my life, it almost always moves somewhere. Like that poem Abortion Wish actually just started out. That's like a second attempt at that poem, and it was really, I thought I was writing about how sort of interesting it was to have this half-brother out in the world that, that I had never met, that's out there somewhere. It was, sort of fascinating, and that was really the start of the poem, and then it moved on its own into an entirely different area, as you heard. Yeah, I think that, I think there's another poet who's talked about holding the reins loosely, and If you haven't yet read Triggering Town by Richard Hugo, I would encourage that. He talks really accessibly about this subject. If you think about Degrees of Grey in Phillipsburg, his iconic poem, because he didn't know anything about that town, that old mining town. In fact, he didn't even want to go there that day. Or Annick Smith, the filmmaker, she said, we want to do this film. It ended up being Kicking the Loose Gravel Home. We want to make this film of you. We want to shoot some footage in Phillipsburg, this old mining town, Phillipsburg, Montana. And Hugo, like, I don't want to go to an old mining town. I'm a poet of rivers and forests and bass well, man, he gets there and it turns into a triggering town. It's a triggering subject for him. And so he ends up writing probably the greatest poem he ever wrote because they convinced him to go there. And because he didn't know anything about the town, he was able to assume things about it. You know, the only prisoner is always in the jail, you know. The try of tortured drivers to accelerate their lives down the road. A dance floor built on springs in the past of the town, and he actually he appropriated that from some other town that he'd heard about, and he just said, well, let's make it Phillipsburg. But there's a truth to that poem that's the emotional truth at the end, you know, and that is about this sort of bleakness of spirit. You know, say the last good kiss you had was years ago. You walk these streets laid out by the insane, past hotels that didn't last, bars that did, you know, and so forth. And so there are all these actual images and pieces, you know, the huge mill and collapse that won't fall finally down up above the town that he's using. These are all actual images and stuff from the town, but they're in service to this emotional truth. These degrees of gray that are in the town, but that are also in here. So, and he talks in there about how, you know, it's always, even in elementary school, it's easier to add things than to subtract, right? So when you're writing from something that happened in your life, you don't want to let go of that because you have a ego investment. There's a personal investment to that. It happened to you, right? No, but her name is Zoe. I want it to be Zoe. I'm sorry, Zoe doesn't rhyme with, you know, table. So it can't be. In fact, nothing rhymes with, okay. Abel, it has to be Abel. You got to change the gender too. And so, you know, that kind of thing. And so gradually it gets easier to let go of those personal details and hold the reins loosely and let this thing let the art live. Let the surprises come along by the process.
If you're trying to stay too close to the reality of whatever, you know, what your trigger is, don't you run the risk then, like you're saying, of it basically becomes more like a report or a,
Yeah.
you know, something like that rather than poetry.
Yes, that's right. It becomes repertorial. And there are repertorial elements to some poems for sure. Like in my Getting It Done, that's repertorial. I mean, it's in response. But you have to let it evolve. It has to have a life of its own, because if you already know what this poem is before you start writing it, then it's not going to be a poem. It's not going to fly. It's going to be a bird that can't really get off the ground. That's the what's so damn hard about poetry and so beautiful is that the reciprocal creation. It's you and your muse, my muse, right here. I've got a nice looking muse, don't I? Your muse, the imagination, God, whatever you want to call it, it's some kind of other, right? That that is in the process, called the process, and we have to hold the reins loosely. Yeah.
Your poem, Abortion Wish, really resonated with me. It really struck an emotional chord. And I was curious about your process with writing something so emotional that seems to embody such a spectrum of emotions as well. And in channeling the experiences of someone else into your poem, like how did that process go for you? What did that look like? And how was the collaboration process with your mom or just seeking her approval afterwards? How did that go for you?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's always very difficult to know. There are a couple of poems that I've written that I think are really good, but I haven't published them because they would hurt someone too much, and so I've just put them away. But after I wrote this one, I shared it with my mother. And I was really nervous about how she would feel about it. And she was just beautiful. She started reading it, and she said, "Oh, this seems like it's about my life. Oh, this is about my life." And she felt honored by the poem, and she was comfortable having it out there, but it's something all of us writers, I think, have to think about in terms of what we're gonna publish, what we're gonna share. You know, Raymond Carver, may have heard of that guy. Yakima poet sitting over there. They might know who he is. He said, writing is sharing our common secrets. And I know he made a couple of people a little ticked off with his stories and some poems. But it's a tough one there. And there's no easy answers, and I think it's a case by case thing. And like I said, I didn't write that in response to our current Supreme Court. But as it happens, it's a story from the early 60s in rural Oregon. And my mother, and it's all, her memory. And she said that the rich girls flew somewhere, had something done and came back, and nobody, went away for a weekend and then they were back. And but they didn't have anything like that.
Thank you.
What's that?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you
Hey.
have a favorite literary device or style that you enjoy using in your poetry?
Well, I don't know. I think, I've never really thought of it that way, because, we study all these literary devices, right? And we learn how to name them and identify them and so forth. I know Ellen Bass adores metaphor. she's a genius with metaphors. I think, you know, for me, certainly imagery is important, metaphor, and it has to sound right. There has to be some word music there. And this goes back to that one question you had about what I like in poetry. And so I'm trying to do the same things in my own poems that I am reading for in terrain.org. It has to sing a little bit. We have, one of the difficult things about the Dear America book is that, you know, one of the challenges with more politically engaged poetry, I think there is a place for that in our culture, and it's important, but it goes back to your question. So many of our writers, you know, were just so stuck on the message that there was never any life to the piece. You know, they knew what it was going to say, and so it was more like a sign or a proclamation or propaganda or something than the kind of living thing that a poem is, that moves, needs to leap and surprise, and that's something, leaps. Poems should turn or leap typically, and that's another way to think about the triggering subject versus the generated subject, is the kinds of turns it makes. So in that one poem I read, the new one called Golden Jubilee, there's a turn when about 3 stanzas down we get, what did they mean, those afternoons after church? You know, that's a turn from the basic description of those cornrows. And so word music, and I like it when I can sing. I really try to sing. It's hard to sing well. Joe Powell sings beautifully. He's got a more formal aspect to his poems that I really admire. I'm not as always, I can't write formal poems as well as he can. But some word music, imagery, metaphors, and then there are things that happen in leaps and turns, you know. Shake them in a bag, put them in the oven, put it on 425 for 30 minutes. You've got yourself a poem, or a shrinky-dink, one of the two. I wonder if shrinky-dinks have made it into any poems.
Do you write very many poems nowadays that are formal forms, or?
A little bit, yeah. I think it's like when I'm not writing and I'm trying to come back to writing, that's a fun way to do it, is just think, I'm going to try a villanelle here. We were talking about this on the drive down here. Zach's been working on a new villanelle. You know, I had such a influential, I had a couple of influential teachers, but what I'm thinking of now is Nelson Bentley at the University of Washington, who was a student of and a friend of Theodore, well, not a student, he was a colleague of Theodore Roethke, a great admirer of him, and so he always was advocating forms, I think that I really want to do more of that. I'm always thinking, want to write more in form, and sometimes my poems gravitate, just like it starts out with free verse, and then suddenly I realize I'm writing in blank verse. But if you're writing in form, then the chances that you're singing, I think, are generally greater. Whereas if it's more organic free verse, then a lot of times the music isn't endemic to the structure. Oh, yeah. So Ellen Bass is a newer one, someone that I started reading deeply after I came to LiTFUSE, as a matter of fact, and got to meet Ellen. And what she does with metaphor just astonishes me. Kind of puts me in mind, I remember, like, Maya Angelou in I Know Why the Cage Birds Sing. She has a genius with metaphor as well. But William Stafford was very important to me. He was really the first poet that turned my crank, got me going. And I still go back and read him. I love Mary Oliver. And keep going back to her. Let's see. Read a lot of Seamus Heaney. It's a long list.
Ellen Bass talks about how she's writing, she'll think of something, there will be some trigger that they'll start a poem. And what she thinks the poem is gonna be about never turns out to be the poem that she started writing. Is that your experience too? Where
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
goes somewhere, like you don't know what this poem is about when you start.
Yeah.
And I didn't believe that until I started writing more and more and found that, yeah, that's totally true. It's like, I wonder what this one's going to be about, by the time I'm done with it. So, is that your experience?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that in your newer poems too, that you're making. Like, I hear you're winning like Yakima Coffee House prizes and stuff like that here. Pretty cool. But yeah, that is, that's where the art is, right? These things are kind of alive. And that Golden Jubilee, that Sweet Corn poem that I shared with you, actually was commissioned for an anthology of poems about gardens. And so it started out as a garden poem, and then very quickly became a beloved uncle poem. And he hijacked it. I started writing about gardens, but that wasn't the poem that needed to come through me at that time. It was my uncle who was failing. So, yeah, it's, and that's why things like LiTFUSE and gatherings like this and workshops and writing groups are so good, because and why us poets are so willing to work for free so often is that we just need a starting point, right? Like, hey, write me, it's like Mark Doty, when he wrote that classic poem, Golden Retrievals, that gorgeous sonnet with the last line that reads, bow wow, bow wow, bow wow. And it was for this anthology of poems that had to be in the voice of your pet. And he was like, they asked him to write that, and he's like, God, I'd never write a poem like that. And then like a week or two went by, and here comes Golden Retrievals. Beautiful. So I think it's like a perfect poem. I think there are some perfect poems in the language that I think of, like Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. I think is a perfect poem. There's not a false note in that poem. And he was like Ellen, and like me, unfortunately, in that we agonize, not to compare myself with him in terms of quality, but I know that he agonized over the words for that poem, and it was about 20th or 30th draft when he finally came across the word offices, of love's austere and lonely offices. Oh God, perfect, cold, formal word.
I've noticed that a lot of poets take like 10 years before they end up with a collection of poems that make sense to put together. And I think it might be because of this phenomenon that when you start, you know, I was thinking of like, if you were going to sit down and say, well, I want to write a collection of poems about my mother, or, you know, my family or something. But when you start writing, then the poem takes off in its own direction, and maybe that's why it takes so long to come up with a collection of poetry.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It is interesting. There are people in the poetry world who write kind of project books, like they set out to do these kind of a series of definitions or something like that. Linda Beards writes books like that, and kind of historical poetry, and I really admire that. That's not the way I go about it. I'm just, you know, mine are a little more organic. But it's one of the things I think about. It's like, gosh, you know, maybe, then I'll have readers sometimes who are like, you should do a whole series of poems like this. And I'm always resistant because I'm like, I did that. I want to go on and do something, try something new, right? But one of the challenges I have for myself is like, I do need to go back and look at some of these things that I've already done before that I can maybe do a series or, you know, try to get a book out of it or something. Yeah. But I was thinking about Ellen's poem about those orange and white high-heeled pumps that she talks about and shares those drafts with us. I think it took her like 20 years to write that poem, didn't it?
Something like that.
Yeah, so
Long
crazy. Fine madness. I think we had enough Q. I think we had enough Q&A.
We should take a break. Let's take a break. Get yourself, refill your glasses, grab a piece of pizza, and stop some We'll start again at 8:15. If you have not signed up yet for open mic and would like to read, I'm just going to leave this up here on the podium. Please come sign.